Old priest's affair with married woman turns into double homicide. Key characters in the story. Gregory Thompson, 42, a former military man turned construction foreman, a hardened, skeptical individual who lost faith in God years ago, husband to Valerie, father to Ethan and Lily. His discovery of his wife's affair leads to the double homicide. Valerie Thompson, 38, a deeply religious woman, devoted wife and mother of 2. Despite her commitment to faith, she finds herself trapped in an unhappy marriage and begins an affair with Father Calloway. Her betrayal ultimately leads to her tragic death. Father Michael Calloway, 67, a respected Catholic priest who has served St. Benedict Catholic Church for over 3 decades, struggles with loneliness and temptation, eventually engaging in a forbidden relationship with Valerie. His affair with a married woman ends in his murder. Ethan Thompson, 14, son of Gregory and Valerie, unaware of the turmoil in his parents' marriage, his father picks him up from a friend's house on the night he first suspects the affair. Lily Thompson, 10, daughter of Gregory and Valerie, too young to understand the complexity of her parents' failing relationship. Monica Perez, 41, Valerie's best friend and confidant, notices Valerie's strange behavior in the months leading up to the murder and later provides crucial information to investigators. Detective James Carter, 45, lead investigator on the double homicide case, known for his methodical and relentless pursuit of the truth. Detective Sarah Nguyen, 33, Carter's partner, sharp and detail-oriented, helps piece together the timeline leading up to the murder. Father Joseph Reynolds, 59, another priest at St. Benedict Catholic Church, notices Father Calloway's growing agitation but never suspects the affair until after the murder. Gas station clerk, 26, the employee working at the gas station outside Las Vegas where Gregory is arrested, recognizes his face from the news and alerts the police. Prosecutor David Langston, 50, the lawyer who builds the case against Gregory in court, presenting the overwhelming evidence that leads to his life sentence. Defense attorney Mark Ellison, 48, Gregory's court-appointed lawyer, attempts to argue that the murder was a crime of passion, but the evidence against his client is too strong. Judge Evelyn Harper, 56, presides over Gregory's trial and hands down the life sentence. Jurors, various ages, the individuals responsible for deliberating the case, they quickly reach a guilty verdict, given the damning evidence. Various churchgoers, 40s-70s, parishioners of St. Benedict Catholic Church who later express shock at the scandal and tragic deaths. Hotel-motel owners, 50s-60s, individuals who unknowingly rent rooms to Gregory while he is on the run. In August 2013, the bodies of 67-year-old Father Michael Calloway and 38-year-old Valerie Thompson were discovered inside the confessional booth of St. Benedict Catholic Church in Riverside, California. What seemed at first like a shocking act of violence in a house of worship soon unraveled into a dark tale of infidelity, betrayal, and vengeance. The investigation would expose a secret affair that began in November 2012, a bond between a priest and a married woman that spiraled into tragedy. But the story truly started months before, when a broken marriage and a crisis of faith set the stage for a night of divine punishment. On the morning of August 6, 2013, authorities were called to St. Benedict Catholic Church in Riverside, California, after a parishioner arriving for early prayers found the church doors unlocked and an eerie silence within. Inside the dimly lit confessional booth, police discovered the lifeless body of Father Michael Calloway, a well-respected 67-year-old priest, and beside him, a partially clothed woman later identified as Valerie Thompson, 38, a devoted churchgoer and wife of Gregory Thompson, 42. Both victims had suffered fatal gunshot wounds to the chest. The gruesome scene suggested a moment of raw, explosive violence. Blood pooled beneath their bodies, staining the red velvet of the confessional seats. The dim flicker of votive candles in the church gave the crime an unsettling, almost ceremonial aura. The police noted that there was no forced entry and all valuables remained untouched, indicating a crime of passion rather than a robbery. Within hours, investigators obtained security footage from the small church parking lot. At 9:43 p.m. the previous night, a vehicle registered to Gregory Thompson was seen pulling up to the church, though no one was recorded leaving the premises. The footage also showed no signs of struggle at the entrance, suggesting the killer had entered through unlocked doors, perhaps aware of the secret rendezvous happening inside. By July 8, 2013, investigators began questioning church members and friends of the victims. Valerie's best friend, Monica Perez, 41, told authorities that Valerie had been acting strangely for weeks, growing increasingly secretive and withdrawn. A fellow priest at the church, Father Joseph Reynolds, admitted that he had noticed Father Calloway seemed agitated recently, frequently skipping meals and spending long hours locked in the rectory office. Then, on January 20th, 2014, police finally had enough evidence to issue a warrant for the arrest of Gregory Thompson. He had fled the night of the murder but was finally located 2 weeks later at a gas station in Nevada, living out of his truck. His trial would become one of the most shocking cases of betrayal and violence the town had ever seen. But to understand what led to that fatal night, we must go back to the beginning of an affair that should have never happened. On a cold November evening in 2012, the wind outside St. Benedict Catholic Church howled through the nearly empty parking lot. Inside, the air was still, the scent of melted wax from countless votive candles hanging thick in the dimly lit space. A few late-night worshippers knelt in silent prayer, their heads bowed, unaware that within the confessional an entirely different kind of plea was unfolding. Valerie Thompson sat on the kneeler, hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The wooden partition between her and Father Michael Calloway felt like a wall closing in on her, trapping her within her own guilt. Her breathing was uneven, her chest rising and falling as she struggled to find the right words. The stillness of the church did nothing to calm the storm inside her. She needed to confess, to purge the weight pressing against her ribs, yet the words felt like shards of glass in her throat. She had betrayed her vows. She admitted that, in a moment of weakness, she had reconnected with a former lover, a man she had loved before Gregory, before marriage, before children. It had been brief, a single mistake during a visit to Texas to see her mother. Yet despite the months that had passed since that night, the guilt clung to her skin like an illness she couldn't shake. She spoke of it as though it had poisoned her soul, as though no amount of prayer could undo what had been done. On the other side of the partition, Father Calloway listened in silence, his head bowed, eyes shut, as though shielding himself from what he was hearing. He had heard countless confessions in his 30 years of priesthood, men and women who had stumbled, seeking absolution before returning to their lives with a renewed sense of devotion. But this was different. She was different. He could hear the weight of her regret in her voice, the deep cracks of sorrow that came with it. He had known Valerie for years, watched her grow into a devoted wife and mother, seen her serve the church with unwavering faith. She had been a fixture of St. Benedict for as long as he could remember, yet here she was unraveling before him, pleading for mercy, her voice thick with unshed tears. His own breathing had become unsteady. He felt something deep within him stir, something he had long buried beneath his vows, his faith, his discipline. He wanted to comfort her, to reach out, but his hands remained tightly folded in his lap. That night, Valerie left the church feeling lighter, but Father Calloway did not. The absolution he had given her felt empty, forced, as though he had spoken the words but not truly believed them. He found himself awake well past midnight, staring at the ceiling of his modest room in the rectory, unable to shake the echo of her trembling voice. He told himself it was simply concern for a troubled soul, nothing more. But when she returned a week later, he could no longer ignore the truth. December arrived with rain, heavy drops beating against the stained glass windows as Valerie returned to the confessional, her need for guidance pulling her back to the only place that had ever made her feel safe. This time she did not speak of her sin. Instead, she spoke of her marriage, of Gregory's coldness, of the loneliness that had settled into their home like a ghost. She spoke of her regret, but also of her pain, of how the betrayal had not started with her, but with Gregory, with the other women, with the way he had drifted so far that she felt like a stranger in her own home. Father Calloway listened, feeling something within him begin to shift. Her words seeped into him like a slow, burning fire. He had never been a husband, never known the weight of a failing marriage, but he knew loneliness, knew the way it could hollow out a person from the inside. He had lived it for decades. What began as a spiritual counseling session turned into something else entirely. By the time January 2013 arrived, Valerie's visits were no longer about confession. She no longer knelt behind the partition, but instead sat across from him in his office, the doors always left slightly open at first, as though a reminder that nothing improper was happening. But the doors started closing. The conversations became longer, stretching late into the night. She shared her fears, her dreams, her regrets. And he shared pieces of himself he had never spoken aloud to anyone. He told her of the sacrifices he had made for his calling, of the nights he spent wondering if he had chosen a path that had left him isolated, with only scripture and duty to fill the void. He did not say it outright, but she could sense it. He envied her life, even with its brokenness. One night, as they sat in his office, the tension between them became impossible to ignore. It was there in the way she sat slightly closer than before, in the way his gaze lingered too long on the softness of her features. She was beautiful, and he hated himself for noticing it. When February 2013 came, the boundary between them had already blurred. It was inevitable. The emotions they had fought so hard to contain broke through, and what followed was a fall neither of them had expected. The first time it happened, it was hesitant, fearful, an act that sent waves of guilt crashing over them even as they surrendered to it. Afterward, neither of them spoke, sitting in the silence of the room as though waiting for divine punishment, but it did not stop. Guilt could not erase desire. Shame could not undo what had already been done. By March 2013, they were meeting in secret. Late nights in the rectory, stolen moments in the darkened hallways of the church. It was dangerous, reckless, and yet neither of them could stop. For Father Calloway, Valerie was both his sin and his salvation. For Valerie, he was the only thing that made her feel alive again, but nothing sinful stays hidden forever. And what had started in whispers would soon end in blood. It was a warm June evening in 2013 when the first seed of suspicion took root in Gregory Thompson's mind. He had come home after a long shift at the construction site, his boots heavy with dust, his body aching for a shower and a quiet night. But Valerie was not home. At first, he thought little of it. She often attended evening church meetings, small prayer gatherings with women from the parish. It wasn't unusual for her to be out late. But something felt different. Her absence was becoming too frequent, too routine, and when she returned home, she carried a glow that had nothing to do with faith. She moved through the house, lighter, more at peace, as though she had found something or someone to ease the burdens of her life. Gregory did not ask questions, but he paid attention. By early July, the tension in their marriage had settled into something unspoken but sharp, like a blade pressed against the skin but never quite cutting. Valerie was happier without him. She no longer cared when he stayed out late. She no longer tried to mend what was breaking between them. She simply existed in a world that did not include him. Then came the night of July 17th, 2013. Gregory was on his way to pick up their son, Ethan, from a friend's house when he saw it. Valerie's car parked outside St. Benedict Catholic Church. It was 11:30 p.m. There was no service. There was no committee meeting. Gregory pulled his truck to the side of the road, his breath slowing, his fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly that the leather strained beneath his grip. His eyes locked onto the silver sedan sitting in the church's empty lot, the only vehicle there. He told himself it could be nothing. Maybe she had forgotten something at the church. Maybe she had come to pray alone. But deep inside, he already knew the truth. Minutes passed, each second dragging like an eternity. Then, at 11:52 p.m., the heavy wooden doors of the church opened. Gregory sat completely still, his pulse thudding in his ears as he watched Valerie step out into the dim glow of the street lamp. She moved slowly, hesitantly, her hands smoothing down the front of her dress as if to make herself presentable. There was something in her posture, in the way she touched her own skin, as though still feeling the weight of someone else's hands. Then, a moment later, another figure appeared behind her. Father Michael Calloway. Gregory's stomach twisted. There was no space between them, no formality, no sign of the holy distance that should have existed between a priest and a parishioner. Gregory saw the way Father Calloway's gaze lingered on her, the way his hand barely brushed her arm before falling away. He saw the way Valerie did not move quickly enough, as if reluctant to leave. They exchanged a few words, but Gregory did not need to hear them. He already understood what had happened in the dark, silent halls of that church. His wife was sleeping with a priest. The rage that built inside him was slow, simmering, spreading through his veins like a sickness. But he did not move. He did not storm out of the truck or confront them in the empty parking lot. He simply sat there, watching, his hands so tight on the wheel that his nails nearly split his own skin. By the time Valerie got into her car and drove away, Gregory remained frozen in place, his mind playing the scene over and over like a broken tape. He did not sleep that night. Instead, he waited. He watched. For weeks, Gregory became a ghost in his own home, saying little, observing everything. He noticed how Valerie left the house later than before, how she dressed differently on the nights she claimed she was only going to pray. He noticed how her phone was always silent, always face down on the counter, as if afraid it might betray her with a single vibration. He began timing her absences, noting the patterns, the excuses, the lies that came too easily to her lips. But he never said a word. Instead, he let the anger settle, let it grow, let it consume him, until it was all he could think about. Then came August 5th, 2013. Gregory was supposed to be working late, but instead he waited outside their home in his truck, watching the clock. At 9:37 p.m., Valerie left. She drove the familiar route, making no detours, no stops. Gregory followed at a distance, his heartbeat steady, his grip firm against the gear shift. He already knew where she was going. By 9:52 p.m., she pulled into the church parking lot. Gregory parked in the shadows half a block away, his truck idling, his eyes locked onto the illuminated entrance of St. Benedict Catholic Church. Valerie disappeared inside and Gregory waited. The rage inside him had turned to something calm, steady, unwavering. Tonight, he would see it for himself. Tonight, he would catch them in the act. Tonight, the sins of his wife and her priest would no longer be hidden in the darkness of a church. Tonight would be the last night either of them breathed. The air inside St. Benedict Catholic Church was thick with the scent of burning candles and aged wood, the kind of stillness that should have felt sacred, untouched. But as Gregory stepped through the back entrance on the night of August 5th, 2013, there was nothing holy about the way his hands clenched into fists, nothing righteous about the slow, controlled breaths he forced into his lungs. His military training took over. He moved like a shadow, his boots silent against the marble floor. The darkness was his ally, swallowing his presence as he crept deeper into the church, navigating through the empty pews, past the towering crucifix that hung above the altar. There was no hesitation in his movements, only a cold, deadly focus. He had been trained to eliminate threats, and now there were two. From the corner of his eye, he caught the flicker of a dim light inside the confessional booth, the carved wooden panels barely concealing the silhouettes moving within. His pulse, already pounding, became a dull roar in his ears. Then he heard it, whispers, muffled, urgent, the sound of labored breaths, the kind that had nothing to do with prayer, nothing to do with confession. Gregory's jaw locked, his stomach twisting as he stepped closer, the shadows keeping him hidden. Through the narrow opening of the confessional door, he saw them. Father Calloway's robe was unfastened, the fabric slipping from his shoulders, pooling at his waist. His bare chest gleamed under the dim glow of a flickering candle, his aging hands tangled in Valerie's hair as she pressed herself against him. She wasn't resisting, she wasn't begging for mercy. She was wrapped around the priest, surrendering to him, as though this sacred place had become their personal altar of sin. For a split second, Gregory did not move. It was like watching a slow-motion nightmare unfold, a horror that burned itself into his vision, searing through his veins like fire. This was not something he had suspected. This was not a fear he had imagined. This was real. This was happening. A white-hot rage exploded inside him, consuming every last thread of restraint. In one swift practice motion, his hand moved to his waistband, fingers wrapping around the cool steel of the Glock 19 he had carried for years. The gun felt like an extension of himself, like something he was meant to use in this exact moment. Before either of them could react, before Valerie could pull away, before Father Calloway could stumble back in horror, Gregory raised the gun and pulled the trigger. The first shot tore through the priest's chest. The sound shattered the stillness of the church, the gunfire ringing off the walls, echoing through the empty space. Father Calloway's body jerked violently, his hands clawing at his chest as his knees buckled beneath him. Blood, dark, thick, poured from the wound, staining his sacred robes as he crumpled against the confessional's wooden paneling. His eyes filled with asterisk, shock, pain, and something else, a quiet acceptance. Locked onto Gregory's for the briefest of moments before his head tilted forward, lifeless. But Gregory wasn't done. His gaze snapped to Valerie, who had stumbled backward, her hands raised as if to shield herself from what she knew was coming next. Her bare shoulders trembled, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. There was no apology in her eyes, no plea for forgiveness, only a deep, overwhelming fear. But fear wasn't enough. Gregory fired again. The second bullet tore into her stomach. She let out a strangled cry as her body folded inward, her knees hitting the confessional floor with a sickening thud. She clutched her stomach, her fingers pressing against the gaping wound, blood seeping through her dress, dripping onto the polished wood beneath her. She tried to breathe, but nothing came. Her lips parted, her mouth moving, maybe to say his name, maybe to beg for another chance. But Gregory didn't care. He watched as her body sagged against the booth, her head lolling to the side, her face pale with shock and pain. Her fingers twitched, then stilled. The church was silent again. Only the distant crackling of candles remained, the faint scent of incense lingering in the air, mixing with the metallic tang of blood. Gregory stood over them, gun still clenched in his hand, his chest rising and falling in steady, controlled breaths. This was not a crime of passion, this was justice. His wife and her priest lay entwined in death, just as they had been in sin. A fitting punishment. He should have felt satisfaction, closure, something, but instead, there was only emptiness. He stayed there for what felt like hours, though it could have been mere minutes. The weight of what he had done sank into his bones, but he did not regret it. They had deserved this. Finally, his grip on the gun loosened. His feet, as though moving on their own, stepped away from the bodies, back into the shadows, back into the night. By the time he slipped out the back entrance and into his truck, the moon had risen higher, casting an eerie silver glow over the quiet town. He turned the key in the ignition, and then he ran. For 14 days, Gregory Thompson moved like a ghost, slipping through towns, changing motels, paying in cash, never staying in one place long enough to leave a trail. August 6th, 2013, had turned him into a fugitive, a man running not from his crime, but from the moment he would have to face the world and what he had done. The weight of 2 bullets, 2 bodies, 2 lifeless figures in a church confessional had not lifted, but he carried it with a quiet acceptance. He had done what needed to be done. That thought kept him steady. The memory of Valerie's betrayal, Father Calloway's sin, the way their blood mixed on the church floor like an unholy union, it all played in his mind, but there was no regret. He drove for hours at a time, only stopping when exhaustion forced him to. He ate alone, slept with one hand close to the gun he had yet to discard, and listened to news reports crackling over the radio in cheap motel rooms. The police were searching, the manhunt was expanding, but he was careful, just as he had been trained to be. No digital footprints, no phone calls, no mistakes. By the time August 19th, 2013 arrived, the fuel gauge on his truck was nearly empty. The last tank had taken him deep into Nevada, miles away from the familiarity of California, closer to the border where he thought he could disappear for good. The gas station off Interstate 15, just outside Las Vegas, was quiet in the late afternoon heat. The sun hung heavy in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. Gregory stepped out of the truck, the stale desert air wrapping around him. His hands, calloused from years of labor and stained with sins that no water could wash away, gripped the fuel pump. He didn't notice the unmarked police car parked just beyond the convenience store. He didn't see the officers watching him, memorizing his face, comparing it to the image splashed across every television screen in the country. It wasn't until the first set of red and blue lights flashed that he realized it was over. He did not run, he did not speak. As the officers approached, weapons drawn, commands sharp and loud, he simply lifted his hands and let the moment take him. No fight, no resistance. The trial was swift. The evidence was undeniable. The jury did not deliberate for long. On October 3rd, 2013, Gregory Thompson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He stood before the court, shoulders squared, face unreadable, showing no remorse, no plea for mercy. In the end, the sins of the flesh led to the judgment of steel. And St. Benedict Catholic Church, once a sanctuary, was now remembered only as the place where love, faith, and betrayal collided in blood and bullets. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our daily updates, and check out another shocking case we covered. The girlfriend sets up her baby daddy to murder him and cash the $250K life insurance. Make sure to check it out and let us know your thoughts in the comments section.